This is the Galaxy Z Fold 7, and Samsung has finally done it. After years of chunky, awkward foldables that honestly felt more like holding a small brick than an actual phone, they've created something that is genuinely compelling, not just as a foldable phone, but also as a proper flagship device. I'm talking about a phone that's literally only a fraction of a millimeter thicker than the S25 Ultra when closed, which is wild when you consider that this thing has two screens and a hinge inside. And while it's seeing a price increase starting at $2,000, honestly, I think it kind of earns it. Let's discuss. I want to start with what genuinely blew my mind about the Fold 7. Look at how thin this is. When details of this phone started to leak prior to launch, I was skeptical at just how much of a difference that would make to me in practice. But actually holding it in person, my brain just has this gut, holy shit, this is nice kind of reaction every single time I pick it up. When the Galaxy Fold 7 is closed, this phone is 8.9 millimeters thin. That's only 0.7 millimeters thicker than the S25 Ultra, and opened up, it is only 4.2 millimeters thin. Perhaps the icing on the cake is that this entire package is actually 3 grams lighter than the S25 Ultra and a whopping 25 grams lighter than last year's Galaxy Fold 6. You certainly feel it when using the phone closed with one hand, but the perceived weight, or lack thereof it, especially unfolded, makes this hugely comfortable to use. The only sort of downside I was able to see with the Fold 7 profile is that it can be a bit hard to open because it's so thin. But honestly, this isn't much of a deal breaker whatsoever. But as I mentioned in the intro of this video, probably the biggest game changer for me with the Z Fold 7 has to be the wider 21:9 cover display. Up until now, previous generations of the Fold were quite narrow. Now, sure, they were nice to use with one hand, sharing similar ergonomics to a TV remote, but especially for things like typing and especially UI with certain apps, things would feel quite cramped with the overall user experience. And so for the Z Fold 7, having a 21:9 cover display is a big deal, because now it has a standard aspect ratio found on non-folding smartphones. And it's not just the width that makes it good either. It's a 6.5-inch AMOLED screen with a 1080 by 2520 native resolution, a 120Hz refresh rate, and peaks at 2600 nits of brightness. In fact, it is so good that, at least to my estimation, I'm using it about 60% of the time compared to the main inner display. That's for checking social media, email, quick searches on the web, and replying to messages. It is perfect for that. And then for the other 40%, I have tablet mode for when I actually need the bigger screen. This guy is an 8-inch 120Hz AMOLED panel with also a peak brightness of up to 2600 nits. And it serves me quite well during my lunch breaks to play games, or when I need to actually multitask between two windows. I also do find it pretty handy when I need to take selfies with the main camera array. Plus, of course, it almost comes in clutch when watching YouTube videos in bed. Obviously, this thought comes with the benefit of hindsight, but this balance that the Fold 7 allows for between both of its screens truly realizes the vision of the original Galaxy Fold, which is really cool to see. Of course, even despite the strides that Samsung made with the Z Fold 7, foldables still carry a stigma when it comes to durability amongst enthusiasts. While you're certainly not going to be getting that IP68 or IP69 dust and water resistance that's common among flat phone flagships, the Fold 7 is good for IP48, which I'll certainly take. But also, there are some improvements to the design here that hopefully help the Fold 7 case long term, especially when it comes to wear and tear. For example, the new hinge this year is thinner, more robust, and with regards to the inner display, it helps it to fold in a water droplet shape, evenly dispersing stress, protecting the screen integrity, and it also translates to a less pronounced screen crease compared to previous models. Now, I don't want to oversell it, the crease is definitely still there, but unless you have some massive glare hitting it, it's mostly out of the way and is certainly easy to get used to in the normal day-to-day. In terms of outer protection, the front screen has Gorilla Glass Ceramic 2, the back has Victus Glass 2, which both have proven to be quite durable considering this device has taken quite a few tumbles in my few weeks of testing. Though I will say that my only gripe with the cover display glass is that I wish that it had that same game-changing anti-reflective coating that we've come to appreciate from the S24 and S25 Ultra. Performance-wise, the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is powered by the tried and true Snapdragon 8 Elite along with 12 gigs of RAM, which has given me plenty to work with, especially when it comes to multitasking and gaming. I don't know how many weebs are watching this video, but like a lot of people out there, I've been playing a ton of Uma Musume now that this game is finally out in English. For those out of the loop, basically it revolves around training real Japanese racehorses to win prestigious races and championships, though instead of actual horses, they are anime girl interpretations of the horses actually running on real race courses and at horse speeds. But more to my point, the amount of times I've been on the edge of my seat watching these races have made for some really addicting gameplay. And in particular for the Fold 7, it has been an absolute riot, experiencing it on this massive inner display that goes anywhere I go. Tokai Teo holding first, let's go, come on. Hell yeah, look at that. Maybe not as nail-biting as some of the other races that I've done, but peak experience on the Fold 7. Now, one concern I did have going into testing the Galaxy Fold 7 was the thermals, given how thin this device is. In my experience, it's been okay with heat management, that is, until you start really using this thing in direct sunlight during the summer, where you'll start to see the 8 Elite inside of here throttle quite a bit. It's not enough to slow things down a noticeable amount until you're doing something really intensive, such as running a synthetic benchmark while hanging out with your friends. Don't do that. However, the real annoyance with this kind of scenario is that the phone itself actually caps the screen brightness down to unusable amounts to keep itself cool. This actually happened to me in New York right after Samsung Unpacked with 90-degree sun and heavy humidity. Granted, I was still setting up the phone, installing like 100 apps at once. Probably the worst case scenario since the phone also barely had time to optimize and acclimate itself to my normal use. But yeah, in that beating hot sun, this screen was dark. Thankfully, after a couple of weeks here in the drier and slightly cooler Southern California, it's fared way better. I've even used it at outdoor events without many issues to speak of. All this to say, I hope we see some better heat dissipation on the next generation of Z Fold. The cameras on this year's Z Fold 7 are quite an improvement from the Z Fold 6, and most certainly compared to those on the Z Fold 4 and 5, for those eyeing an upgrade from a legacy device. With a 200 megapixel main sensor, you get 2x optical lossless zoom, and overall, the image quality is pretty solid. And while we have a 3x telephoto on here, it is only 10 megapixels, and I think doesn't serve as much purpose compared to the 5x that you get on the S25 Ultra. But as a result, at least for me, outside of that 200 megapixel main shooter, I haven't really been using the other lenses. And on the topic of that camera bump, the one on this phone is super annoying. It wobbles a hilarious amount when placing this phone on a flat surface, and it doesn't help that it gets quite dirty and is hard to clean. Look, I totally get from Samsung's perspective that it can be hard to make concessions with this camera bump, especially when it comes to their product ID and cramming a bunch of tech in here. But imagine just flipping this 90 degrees so that it sits better on a table. It worked for the older Pixels, and it could do Samsung a lot of favors too. A few other things worth mentioning: there is no S Pen support this year, which I know a lot of people are fussing about, but if I'm being honest, I never care about it on the Fold all that much. Samsung has mentioned in the past that generally speaking, a small fraction of users actually utilize this feature on their phones. Plus, especially for the Z Fold, it has usually been gated by a case accessory with no real storage solution. So at least for me, I personally understand this decision. It's not something that has defined my Fold usage, so I could honestly care less. But I will admit it does suck if you were one of the loyal users that actually needed it. Now, the bad news this year is that Samsung's official cases are basically a wash. Effectively, they've decided that you don't need to protect the cover screen side by selling you protection that only covers the bottom half of the phone. But thankfully, third-party options are looking more enticing than ever before. In fact, Spigen, shout out to them, they sent over the Armor Pro case, which has been quite nice, offering full protection for the phone, while also adding things like MagSafe. This has been a huge quality of life improvement since I actually use a MagSafe wallet and magnetic car charger as well. Now, it might not be the thinnest case in the world, but the blessing with the Fold 7 being so thin is that even with the case on, it still goes toe-to-toe with my iPhone 16 Pro Max and its case for pocketability. I do have an Aramid fiber case from a different company showing up in a few weeks on pre-order, and I have a feeling that one will do me much better for portability since it should retain that thinness. But until then, this case is pretty good. Okay, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. Price. The Galaxy Z Fold 7 starts at a pretty steep $2,000, which is a $100 increase from last year. That is genuinely expensive, even for flagship phone standards, but I will say that I do think that the Fold 7 does make a huge leap toward being peak foldable. For power users out there that might have been on the fence about getting a foldable, this one does make a pretty compelling case. For those of you that are already in the Fold family, perhaps from a 4 or 5, this right here, the Fold 7, is a significant leap in almost every sense. Better screens, optimized form factor, improved cameras. Of course, the thinness on this thing is still crazy to me. Of course, even Fold 6 users will see a handful of benefits with the Fold 7, but whether or not it is worth the upgrade will depend on you, especially if you find good trade-in values. Hell, even flagship flat phone users can probably find compelling reasons to upgrade to a Fold 7. Just the fact that the front screen is now basically as good as a standard flagship with its aspect ratio and overall quality means that this foldable is truly the best of both worlds. Now, it might sound crazy considering the $2,000 starting price, and I most certainly don't need to make excuses for a corporation. But at least here in the US, where nobody pays full price for smartphones these days, where they're trading in old devices, seeking carrier promotions, or paying installments, the difference between a $1,400 S25 Ultra and a $2,000 Fold 7 is really blurred in terms of value, even though both are not really a drop in the bucket. This genuinely feels like the future of flagship phones, and that's something I haven't really been able to say wholeheartedly about its previous generations. But let me know, what do you think about this phone in the comments below? And otherwise, thanks for watching this video on Denki channel.